Another check on the game server seemed to be going well from the start, but something went wrong, and the error code turned red because this issue is marked as high priority. A serious error has occurred, as a result of which the location will have to be completely cleared, leaving nothing behind until the error is fixed and everything is back to normal. But what is important now for the red-haired hero is not to run away and save his own skin from destruction, but to revive his younger sister Ellis, who has lost consciousness from this. The young blacksmith Aiden, who is not a game character, starts to panic when the only person close to him does not respond to his calls as his child is dying. The only thing the girl could say was a tortured phrase with which the unhappy child addressed her brother, squeezing out a single word, her last wish being for her brother to survive. But a guard is coming for him, who will now emotionlessly wipe Aiden and little Ellis, who has already given her soul to God and begun to disintegrate, off the face of the earth. The game of hide-and-seek did not work, and the demonic Red Guardian found the brother and sister who were hiding from his eyes, and now Aiden himself had very little time left. There was no time for the brother and sister to say goodbye properly, as the demonic knight aimed a blue energy beam at the two defenseless characters for safety. A moment began that is very typical for the game world, and the guards began to burn everything that came into view and destroy everyone who got in their way. Aiden crawled out from under the rubble of the city and made his way out of the ruins of his hometown. Despite being wounded and beaten, the blacksmith tried to climb out so he could look around. The red-haired blacksmith lost one arm and one leg, but crawled like a wounded dog just to find his little sister Ellis, who was lost in the chaos. Aiden's face is contorted with fear that he has lost the only person close to him forever, and he cries out his sister's name, searching for the little girl everywhere in the ruins. But his tired and frightened eyes looked at what was happening to his little girl, and his eyes simply popped out of their sockets and filled with blood and pain. This couldn't be happening. His little Ellis, the only person close to him in this world, was disintegrating into fragments in the air before his eyes, and he couldn't do anything about it. Aiden loses control and begins to sob when he sees what is happening to his sister. It is now clear that Aiden has lost his beloved sister, his only ray of light. Holding his sister's disintegrating body in his arms, Aiden screams into the void, asking why this is happening and what they have done to deserve this when they lived like ordinary people. Aiden's heart is broken from all the pain and tragedy he has experienced in one night, and he screams at the top of his lungs, praying for it to just end forever. Ellis miraculously remained alive, and taking Aiden's hand before disappearing, said goodbye to her beloved brother, who repeated endlessly that he was so sorry. Aiden continues to beg his sister for forgiveness, crying hysterically and looking at Ellis, whom he was unable to save, and considers her death his fault. The blue-eyed girl bursts into tears and begs her brother to break through and survive all these horrors, saying that he simply has no right to die like this. Aiden must survive, but what is the point of living now when he is completely alone in this world and has no one left to live for and strive for? The only thing left to remember his little sister is a simple bracelet that Ellis never took off, as a reminder that the only sun in her life had gone out forever. A fracture occurred in Aiden's soul, heart, and mental well-being, which became the impetus for the peaceful blacksmith to become a new person in the distant future. The mistake has been found, said an unknown voice from afar, and he saw before him the one for whom he had been sent here, a hunched figure among the ruins. The voice of the unknown masked avenger reports that the threat level is low, but the fact that this character caused alarm gives reason to accuse him. Everything is correct, and this young man is one of the reasons why the so-called error appeared, and because of him, there is a possibility that he will turn into a dangerous virus if anything happens. According to the moderator, it is all the fault of the unplayable character Aiden, who started the complete cleansing of the locations from everything that was there from the very beginning. The time has come to delete Aiden from the location, speed up his meeting with his sister, and the moderator promises that they will be permanently removed from the game server as viruses. Aiden begins to disappear as if he had never been there, crumbling into pixels after the moderator launched a bug cleanup. Now it's all over for this blacksmith. In his last moments, Aiden wonders why everything happened and why life was so cruel to him and his sister, because they wanted nothing more than to live like everyone else. What did they do to deserve being deleted? The answer is that in a world populated by magical creatures, Each player was assigned a role in the world's hierarchy. This led to the emergence of so-called players chosen by the system who hunted these monsters, maintaining the global balance between monsters and humans on the server. People were infinitely grateful to their liberators and saviors, as the threat of attack by magical creatures on the common people had finally receded, but peace did not last long. Absolute power gave the player heroes free rein, and they began to treat the simple, defenseless characters as toys and mocked them as they pleased. They committed many atrocities, but ordinary people could not defend themselves, so they were completely powerless against their oppressors and remained silent. All this lawlessness was happening only because the system moderator had set up pretty strict filtering rules on the server to control all the players. The moderator set up a filter that branded anyone who went against the system as a so-called bug during updates or checks, and they were simply deleted. But Aiden had plenty of problems even without moderators and players. And he didn't really care about all the hostility between the two factions, as life had always been difficult for orphans. Left an orphan on the street with his baby sister in his arms, Aiden racked his brains over how to survive, as they were completely alone in the whole wide world and suffering. He had a little sister in his arms who needed to be fed and clothed so that he could raise the child he'd become both father and mother to, even though he was just a teenager himself. For these abandoned children, regular checks were only a blessing, because in conditions where you are on the margins of society, you have to behave like a rat. Just to survive, and while the checks were going on, everyone seemed to freeze, but he and Ellis, as if by some miracle, were able to move and took advantage of the situation. Neither the fact that he had to steal food nor the checks bothered Edwin, as staying alive and feeding his sister was of paramount importance to him. Over time, Aiden became a blacksmith and made a living repairing weapons, but one day, a client's sword cracked and was destroyed beyond repair. Knowing his role as a character to be beaten, the boy predicted that now he was definitely doomed and that the player would take out his anger on him in the same cruel way that he himself had wanted. At the same time, the customer hit the blacksmith so hard that he flew to the ground, falling to the ground, numb from the shock and pain of the blow, realizing that he was now going to be beaten like a dog. The client reproaches him that there was a 50% chance of success, and Aiden simply messed up, failing such a simple task that even an idiot could have done. The player is angry at the red-haired blacksmith for causing him to lose precious resources that he had decided to spend on upgrading his weapons, and now he has to start all over again. The angry man yells curses at Aiden, saying that he is boiling with rage right now and beating the guy, wishing him dead so he won't take up space for nothing. The angry player's friend saves him from being beaten to death by Aiden's boots, warning that if he continues, Aiden could die and it wouldn't matter. Indeed, why worry about it? He's just an unplayable character, one of hundreds, and to be honest, Aiden is tired of hearing it, as every dog reminds him of it. In the end, the bullies left Aiden alone. But the owner of the broken sword added that the system would still load him after death and told him to leave. If there were no such thing as karma, the man would have definitely beaten Aiden to death. But the boy got up, beaten and bruised, when he heard his sister calling him. Little Ellis had grown up and came to her brother, worried, to ask if he was okay, because she had heard very scary noises when her brother was being beaten and was very frightened. Aiden reminded her that she shouldn't have come down here, as he had told her many times how dangerous it was. But the girl just wanted to help him somehow. Wiping the dust, dirt, and blood off her brother who had been beaten by the players, Ellis asked why they had done that to him, because he definitely hadn't broken their equipment on purpose, but players are players. Ellis wants to grow up as quickly as possible so she can help her brother. And hearing this, the boy couldn't help but rejoice because he has such a sister who loves him. No matter how hard Aiden's work is, to the players he is just trash. But as long as he can protect Ellie and give her what he can, he will live and work on. But then something happened that broke his life, taking away the only person who was the light of Aiden's life and leaving him with a feeling of eternal pain and anger from the loss. The young blacksmith succumbs to inhuman rage, feeling his body and mind overflowing with the desire to tear apart the throat of the person who took the most precious person from him. The red-haired blacksmith's mind screamed that this was not normal, and that something was definitely wrong with this system, and that it all looked like complete madness that had no place in this world. Aiden doesn't understand what he and his sister have done to deserve being removed from the game server, since they were just living their non-game lives like all non-gamers. At the last moment, when the moderator looks at the disappearing Aiden, the boy swears that he will do everything to destroy this damn system forever. Before he dies, the redhead promises to do whatever it takes, and that escaping from hell will be the minimum price for his resurrection and change on the server. In the all-seeing eye of the moderator, all players are equal, so it makes no difference to him what you want to do or how you lived before. You will be wiped out like an insect. And so the life of the unlucky Aiden came to an end. The pixelated body of the young man flies through a digital portal into the afterlife of the characters. With tired eyes, Aiden sees and understands that everything he has seen is gradually disappearing, just as he himself is about to cease to exist, and someone completely different will take his place. But just as the blacksmith was about to give up and surrender himself to fate, his head was suddenly touched by a huge hand resembling a utopian artificial intelligence. The hand of artificial intelligence touched Aiden's forehead, beginning to scan him and reveal information about the location where the error occurred and which would be cleared again. The unplayable character of the blacksmith Aiden will be restored after all, and a new life will begin for him in which the young man must fulfill his new role in the old world. Aiden could not have expected such a turn of events. He wanted to destroy the entire system, and now he is being brought back to life in this very world with completely new rights. The young man found himself once again on the ruins of his own home, where he lost little Ellis not long before all this, and where his own life was cut short during the raid. This godforsaken place is the same as it was before, but there is not a soul or a single house around, so the question of what is going on here now creeps into his mind. Aiden doesn't understand how he managed to return here when he and the other residents were destroyed, and not even a pixel of him remained on the map. He clearly remembers the moment when his body was thrown into the so-called trash bin for discarded characters, and now he finds himself in an updated system. A sign appeared before the blacksmith's eyes, stating that he had been granted first-level moderator privileges and had risen to a certain level, so now he was in shock. Yesterday's powerless, unplayable character is now a moderator and has access to commands and the command line, so Aiden can't believe his eyes. In the forest of Panson on the island of Edeline, life is bustling as usual, and all the players gather there to complete their tasks and level up some of the blacksmith's skills. A knight player in a helmet with green hair is angry that he was hoping for an upgrade after the purge, as the last one was 1,000 years ago. However, the players who suffered losses during the clearances are resigned to the setback and think that nothing has changed, so they wonder what the point of the check and clearance was in the first place. A crowd has gathered, of course, and everyone is gathering around a young blacksmith, and the man in front has his hands folded in prayer that everything will go as it should. The greenhorn asks why everyone is gathered and if there is a good reason for it, and they explain to him that it is just a so-called event, and the warrior is interested. This event is dedicated to the fact that you can sharpen your weapons using only gold instead of resources, increase your sharpening level, and improve the quality of your weapons at the blacksmith. The players are curious about what kind of event this is, as there was no mention of it in the news, so they think it was just a secret event for selected players. Greenhead, like all the other players, was impressed that they had stumbled upon a secret event that was only available to the chosen few, and who wouldn't be happy about an easy way to upgrade. Aiden, who was working on sharpening swords, succeeded, and the players are delighted, because if not now, then when else would they have such good fortune to have their weapons improved? A crowd gathers around Aiden, ready to pay whatever he wants to improve their weapons, and willing to tear each other's throats out for Aiden's work. But the same hero who recently beat Aiden to death with his feet is now pushing the dissatisfied crowd aside and shouting for everyone to move out of the way because he wants to get here. Aiden didn't even have time to rest before a new customer approached him, shouting that it was his turn and that he had brought the blacksmith a lot of work. The client addressed the blacksmith, calling him a simple, unskilled character, drawing the redhead's attention to himself, and Aiden's eyes darted around when he saw the guest. Memories flooded back to Aiden of how this customer and his friend in a helmet had come to him to have his weapon repaired in exchange for resources. This time the client brought a whole bag of swords with him, hinting that Aiden would have more than enough work for an hour and demanding in a rude tone that the blacksmith do it. The blonde player starts to get angry and asks where these bastards are getting off, but he is simply asked to calm down because it will ruin his karma. The thing is, these guys are notorious scammers who buy junk all over the neighborhood, fix it up, and then sell it to others for 3 times the market price. These two have extremely nasty personalities and are always causing trouble for everyone else. And it won't be long before they get fined for assault. The man immediately recognized Aiden as the blacksmith from the city and asked his friend if it was the same guy from the city, but his partner asked what kind of guy he was. Aiden is the same unlucky character from the village that was recently completely wiped out, and they add that the blacksmith was lucky to have survived the apocalypse. But the men are curious why Aiden is alone and ask where the little girl has gone, adding that she was probably useless, so they got rid of her. When Aiden hears what the two are saying about his sister, he clenches his hammer violently and says that the probability of success during forging is 25%. The red-haired blacksmith asks if the player agrees to take the job even though the probability is quite low, but the client immediately agrees to the terms and hands over the money. The man added that he could smell a good deal like a dog smells meat, and if he managed to sharpen at least one of the 4 swords, they would definitely come out ahead. His partner is afraid and hints that all of the redhead's wealth will go down the drain, but he simply tells his friend to shut up and repeat that there is no need to panic. The redhead promises to pay his partner 10 times the amount if, God forbid, something goes wrong, and Aiden continues to work on improving the weapons. The young man can't help but wonder how stupid these people are, and he finds it funny that they are so confident that everything will turn out the way they want it to. But whether this will happen or not is up to Aiden himself. And every sword from Aiden's hammer and every sharpening failed. So Shaitan's money for compensation went down the drain. Whether it was done on purpose or just by accident, all the weapons he brought to improve for Aiden were completely ruined, much to the chagrin of the customer himself. This adventurer was unlucky again, and when he saw how terrible the situation was with all the broken weapons, he simply fell into a state of hysterical horror. But Aiden doesn't even pretend to be sorry for what happened, and the young blacksmith simply says that he is such an incompetent fool that there is nothing to be gained from it. All the other players laugh at the blacksmith for messing everything up and acting like he didn't care, but they admit that at least they had fun, so it's okay. Then the voice of the loser's partner, who lost everything, comes in, yelling that this jerk definitely got his hands on the money and now needs to give him back every penny. The man in armor yells that the redhead promised to pay back 10 times what he lost, and now he can't get out of it. But the redhead is trying to escape responsibility. Pointing with trembling hands at Aiden, he says that it's all his fault, and that the blacksmith is to blame for doing it on purpose out of revenge, but his friend says that it's all nonsense. The other players don't want to put up with the fighting around them, especially while waiting in line for a nearly free level up, so they chase the hooligans away. Meanwhile, time passes, and the line to Aiden's tent is like a mausoleum, with people ready to tear each other's throats out to get in line ahead of their comrades. The whole day flies by at work, and the sky is covered by the dark canvas of night. It's time for Aiden to go home after such a hard and stressful day at the event. The boy barely carries the heavy bag of gold on his shoulder and enters the room after such an exhausting experience at work today into the peace of his home. Finally, Aiden earned a decent amount of money today and understands that with such reserves in his treasury, he will not have to worry about any worldly problems for a long time. So now, after completing all his tasks, the young man thought that he could finally collect his reward, since he was entitled to it and was no longer a background character. On the day when Aiden survived the location cleanup and was reformatted, new things appeared in his life, things that were foreign to him, and before his eyes appeared inscriptions that Aiden had never seen before, and now tables with tasks that were strange to him appeared before his eyes. He is now a player and has completed one of the commands, and Aiden is surprised because he sees the command option and wonders if it is a moderator's ability and is now available to him. Now he would be able to use abilities that were previously only available to the moderator, and Aiden's head couldn't comprehend everything that had happened. The blacksmith almost went blind when he saw the table light up with a golden glow the moment a new message for the blacksmith arrived. A new quest for the first event had been added, and looking at the board, Aiden was surprised to see the news about the quest and now wonders what it is. Aiden tries to remain calm in such a tense situation and keep a cool head, trying to connect all the dots in order to understand. Let's start from the beginning. Aiden remembered that he had initially been resurrected right after the city had been cleared, and was sitting in the middle of the ruins of his hometown wondering what had happened. And all because he was touched by an unknown force that gave him the so-called power of a moderator, which gave him new abilities and a list of commands. But the thing is, unplayable quest characters don't get that, and only someone with the so-called rights and abilities of a moderator, a gift from heaven, could do something like that. Obviously, this stranger had a reason for doing so, but why was he chosen out of all the possible candidates? And then important information began to dawn on Aiden. He saw his younger sister die before his eyes, swallowed up by the system and reformatted into nothingness like everyone else around her, and she wasn't even given a chance. At the mention that he was unable to save his sister due to a system glitch and the whim of a moderator, the boy's face contorted with boundless anger in his soul. He doesn't care how he survived, but the fact is that if he can take revenge on the moderator who destroyed his life and took his sister away, everything will be fine. Aiden agreed to let the system use him as it pleased, but not for free. In exchange, he wanted to ask for one extraordinary privilege. In exchange for the system and the moderator using him, he will act in such a way that he will be able to use the game system on an equal footing with them. Now the blacksmith becomes a second-level moderator and has unlocked the update, so you can enter the command and open the blocked item, and Aiden realizes that he has to try. Everything is fine. His level of authority has been increased, and if he does something unplanned, nothing bad will happen to him, so now he can act as he sees fit. Everything is fine, of course, but it is worth remembering that he is currently an extremely weak player, and no matter how hard he tries, he will not be able to defeat even the weakest newbies on the server. If he is labeled a bug and the next check is launched, he will suffer the same fate, and Aiden will simply be taken and deleted from all game servers. But there must be a way, and we must find it to survive all this injustice. And now, a golden plaque with quest details has appeared before his eyes. Aiden received a new quest, which was to find an Easter egg in the game, the location of which was clearly marked on the map, and the redhead thought it was a treasure hunt. It's no big deal, and he shouldn't rush, as he has no other options. And the reality is that he must complete quests to survive. And if the map is to be believed, the Easter egg is not so far away. So it would be a sin not to take advantage of such an easy opportunity to level up. So Aiden decides to go look for the egg in the mountains at dawn as soon as he wakes up, since the location is clearly marked on the map to make it easy to find this bug. So the young man did just that, heading to the location as soon as he woke up, and it seemed like he had arrived at the right place, but the mountain looked completely different from what he had expected. The red-haired boy cursed loudly when he saw the mess unfolding before his eyes and complained that everything was going wrong and not according to plan. So there was a door he had to go through, which he identified as the so-called dungeon he had to enter in order to see what this Easter egg really was. The dungeon is a place where all players go to increase their skill levels, and for Aiden, the fact that he found himself there was simply fantastic. And what is that hiding in the bushes, spying on him? Some kind of strange shadow that seems to be more trouble than it's worth? But Aiden ignores the stranger. In the end, the unknown man in the cloak is also curious about who this unknown hero is and what his actions will be after the object of his observation enters the cave. What can we say? The young blacksmith was greatly impressed by the size of the cave entrance, as it's not every day you see such a monumental structure, let alone enter it. But he must not lose his head under any circumstances, because if he allows fear to take hold of him now, he will not be able to think about what will happen to him further along the way. If you remember the huge guards that the moderator brought with him on that fateful day, they were just children playing in a meadow, so there was nothing to be afraid of and he had to go. So without waiting for the tide to turn, Aiden opened the monumental gates to finally enter and face his new challenges. From the very first step, Aiden was warned that access was restricted and entry was only allowed from the 80th level, and it was clear why, as a whole gang was waiting for him there. Now things are looking grim, and Aiden realizes that he barely escaped and wonders if players always have to deal with such freaks like now. If so, he definitely feels sorry for them. There are a lot of monsters in the dungeon, in all the caves of this so-called underground vault, where the Easter egg for the quest is hidden. And the young man walked on, following the compass and the marks on the ground, so as not to stray from his path and lose sight of anything. Aiden feels as if he is outside this world, and admits that this is a very unusual road that he has never encountered in his entire life. Finally, the young man stopped in front of something that greatly puzzled him, and the reflection of the doors that appeared before his eyes flashed in the blacksmith's eyes. It was a huge gate that glowed with a soft, heavenly light and had the number 1 marked on it, and the red-haired man was surprised at how big the gate was. The young blacksmith tried to push the door, but no matter how hard he tried, his hands were shaking, and the devilish door would not yield to any of his attacks. But waiting for the so-called golden moment, Aiden decided to use the very ability he had learned about yesterday and open the mysterious lock. The man's pale hand makes its choice by pressing the button, and the screen lights up red, promising that what Aiden has been waiting for will now be revealed to him. It worked, and at the command to update the event, the locked thing finally opened, and now there were no obstacles for Aiden at all. It was logical to think that the door had also succumbed, and glowing with a beautiful light, the gate obeyed the command entered by Aiden. So all that remained was to wait. Aiden stood like a small statue in the middle of the bright blue light of the gate, which had finally become accessible to him as an ordinary player, not a secondary character. The red-haired blacksmith paused for a second, somewhat shocked that the door had opened like that, and now he definitely had to go inside and face the unknown. And he took a step forward into the new door to finally find the so-called Easter egg and complete the second quest as a true player of the server. The light that met Aiden immediately after the door opened was so strong that it blinded him, but he continued to move forward toward danger. Of course, his eyes hurt, but such a mundane thing as pain should not stand in his way when his main goal is to survive and avenge the injustice. He found the artifact, and it was right in front of his eyes, looking like a cluster of light held on a pedestal resembling a paw. So this is the Easter egg, and it shines like a second sun on the pedestal, and it seems that all he has to do is reach out and grab it. Looking at this round body shining with golden light, Aiden realizes that it is the so-called Easter egg from the quest he was given to raise his level. An extremely fast shadow with a sword flew over Aiden's head, hanging over him like a storm cloud over a city, promising that he would definitely have fun like never before. Thankfully, Aiden's reaction didn't fail him this time, and the young man escaped from his attacker, dodging the shadow swordsman's carefully planned attack from the cave. The blacksmith fell on his ass, losing control not only of his legs but of his entire body. And now, gasping for air, he asked himself what kind of freak this was and where he had come from. Where did this magical creature come from in a cave that seemed completely empty at first glance? You can't blame Aiden for not knowing, but that doesn't absolve him of responsibility. The armored monster had no intention of waiting for the clumsy Aiden to make a move and attacked him first, swinging his heavy sword at the uninvited guest. The first blood is shed, and Aiden's hand is severely wounded, cut by the attacker's sword, and the redhead's face contorts from the terrible feeling of blood rushing through his veins. The strength of Aiden and the monster that attacked him were not equal, and the young man received blow after blow from the sword and continued to bleed profusely in a state of shock. The red-haired blacksmith was unable to resist and received blow after blow to his face, blood dripping from his wounds and his skin torn by the blade. All this is hell, but to add to the pain, the armed monster in armor is now pressing down on him with all his might to cut off the redhead's head. Swords came down on the blacksmith's head, and he almost lost his head from the blow. But luckily, he dodged the direct frontal attack to his head, which would have been fatal. Aiden managed to dodge by some miracle and, cornered, looked at the knight, holding his wounds, realizing that the whole situation was getting serious. The red-haired man cursed the monster, calling him a damned freak, unable to contain his anger at what had happened and unwilling to back down. Aiden had nothing left to lose in this life, and his hand reached for his sword on its own, confidently grasping the hilt to begin the unequal battle. The blacksmith drew his sword and thrust it forward to attack the monster first and strike it, no matter how dangerous it was for him at that moment. Logically, the monster is much stronger than him and raises the heavy sword above Aiden's head to destroy this insolent red-haired cockroach in a cloak with a sword. The young blacksmith understood perfectly well that he would not be able to block the monster's blows, and that he would not be able to hold out for very long. But that is no excuse, and Aiden must at least try to attack and rush forward in order to land at least one blow on his opponent and fight back. The monster, trained by countless opponents, thrusts the sharp blade of his sword forward and lunges at the shocked Aiden, who can only defend himself. Another blow lands on Aiden's shoulder, and he shudders from the terrible pain throughout his body, which is about to give way from the blow to his body. It is clear that feeling such inhuman pain, It is impossible to maintain a completely unyielding expression on one's face for long, and Aiden's face contorts from the terrible pain in his nerves. But he still needs to at least try to fight back, and clenching the sword in his pale hands, Aiden prepares to strike his unequal opponent. Plucking up his courage, Aiden managed to strike, and raising his sword, landed a clean blow to the iron statue's chin, shaking its tall, powerful figure. The red-haired blacksmith, seeing that he was able to attack the iron statue, could not help but rejoice, because his attack was successful for the first time since his arrival. For a second, the young master rejoiced because he had finally won when the blade of his sword pressed against the monster's throat with considerable force, and his soul began to sing. The monster's head rolled onto the floor like an empty pot, and Aiden froze when he saw such a turn of events from the unexpected attack of this statue. Aiden's eyes widened at this turn of events, and he felt sick at the sight of what he had seen with his own eyes. The nature of the monster struck him deeply. The nature of the demon Aiden had encountered struck him, and everything under the armor looked like nothing more than a cluster of cosmic energy that controlled it. The music didn't play for long, and the frailer didn't dance for long, as a fist flew straight at his face and broke the young blacksmith's nose with all the brutality of his body. Aiden flew into the wall from the pain, and his body punched a huge hole that exactly followed the contours of his body, which had crashed so hard into the stone wall. Aiden almost coughed up his liver from the blow and suffered multiple concussions, coughing up blood after such a powerful shock to his entire body. It was impossible to believe that this knight's body was empty and controlled by some so-called cosmic force, and to Aiden, it seemed like something beyond comprehension. The young blacksmith's body relaxed when he decided to give up after receiving such a brutal blow, and he began to abandon his initial idea of completing the quest. Aiden cursed himself for knowing that he would fail and still deciding to go into battle, getting hit on the head for his ambition and arrogance. All the events that had happened to him during this time flashed before his eyes. The moderator who had brought him here, the bullying he had suffered in the past, the loss of his sister, and his rebirth. But it was Ellis's words to him before she died, when she asked her brother to do everything he could so that Aiden could survive and live for both of them as they had dreamed together. Aiden's eyes opened again from the rush of adrenaline into his blood, which blocked all the pain from the enemy's blows in his nervous system, giving Aiden new strength to fight. A sword was definitely not a weapon for Aiden, and the blacksmith's weapon was broken and thrown aside, so now he could use his main weapon and tool, the same hammer. With the hammer in his hands, against the backdrop of a pit and a wall, and with bright red eyes burning, he rises from the ashes to take an unconventional stand against the mountain of iron. Aiden understands everything perfectly, and if he can survive and emerge victorious from the battle, he will be one step closer to his goal and revenge. The monster has no intention of leaving Aiden alone, and raises his sword above his head to show this young blacksmith that he is nothing but a worthless insect. He has nothing to lose, so swinging his hammer, Aiden rushes forward in front of the enemy to test the idea that came to his mind. Aiden's hammer is set up so that it either breaks or destroys weapons when sharpened, so the battle between the blacksmith and the Iron Knight will be extremely interesting. The Demon Knight's sword was destroyed by a blow from Aiden's hammer, and it is clear that the sharpening did not go as the Iron Demon from the cave had expected. When Aiden saw that the demon's sword had been shattered into pieces, he was extremely shocked when he received the same informative reminder that the sharpening had been unsuccessful. The blacksmith was shocked that the system did not see and recognize the Demon Knight's body as a magical creature, but saw it as a simple set of so-called armor. This was his chance, and Aiden raised the hammer above his head and with an aggressive grimace attacked the so-called pile of armor that the system saw as simple armor. The system continues to signal that the sharpening was unsuccessful and the armor was destroyed, but Aiden manages to sever the giant's arm with the hammer. Aiden continues to tear and throw around, destroying the demonic pile of armor with well-aimed blows of his hammer, reducing the body of the idol to dust. The monster is, to put it mildly, in shock after being deprived of its arm, especially with a simple hammer, and its mobility is severely limited after losing its limb. Aiden hangs over the demon's head, hammer in hand, viciously striking the enemy's iron armor blow after blow, with no intention of stopping. As nature intended, with each blow of the hammer on the monster's iron body, the system only emitted a signal indicating what had happened up to that point. Finally, using the hammer as a weapon was absolutely the right decision, and now the body of the defeated demon was smashed into a pile of fragments scattered throughout the room. Aiden succeeded and found the so-called Easter egg mentioned in his quest, and all that remained was to confirm that Aiden had achieved all this through combat. The bright golden light of the Easter egg changed from sunny yellow to bright blue tongues of flame, signaling that his actions were correct. So Aiden survived and also completed the task set for him by the system, and now he must take another step forward and see what awaits him next. Aiden's level was raised, and he is now a third-level moderator. Editing updates were unlocked, and the young blacksmith also gained a new ability. The blacksmith asks himself if he came here for her, and with her unhappy boyfriend suffering from injuries and cuts, it is time for him to return. The redhead has suffered extremely severe injuries and can barely move, bleeding profusely with every step and holding on literally by a thread and sheer willpower. He feels terrible, to say the least, and feels that his consciousness is about to leave his battered and scarred body, and Aiden is no longer able to control himself. Finally, the boy loses consciousness and falls face down on the floor, exhausted from bleeding and fighting, and would have remained there lying alone in the field. The same shadow that had been watching him from the beginning noticed the unconscious Aiden, and now she had to take a step forward and probably save this poor man. The hooded figure approached the unconscious body and looked down at him, wondering what she could do for this poor stranger. Finally, the stranger took off her hood, revealing that the shadowy figure with blue eyes was a young girl with bright blue hair and a smile. For a second, the girl's expression changes from neutral to sly and curious about her new acquaintance, whom she encountered so unexpectedly in the middle of nowhere. Aiden, as far as can be understood, is not at all interested in paying attention to the girl in front of him and lies unconscious, covered in wounds and his own blood. The most interesting part begins in the very hall where Aiden's duel with the armored monster took place, because the atmosphere around the Easter egg begins to intensify. A spy camera reappears from the air above the white pedestal and begins to observe everything that is happening and scan the area around the pedestal. The camera scans the fragments left from the knight's armor to study the cause of the monster's condition and find a person who could defeat this monster. The spy confirmed that the dungeon keeper had been destroyed and that traces of the monster who had done it had been found at the site, including blood, a broken sword, and a lower threat level. The spy declares that it is time for him to take so-called emergency measures to prevent the threat level from rising above the current level and to suppress it at the outset. The camera is going to use teleportation to report the situation to the higher-ups and then start acting depending on how things go. Meanwhile, while Aiden lies unconscious, Arya is not going to waste time and studies the board to find out information about her new acquaintance. Meanwhile, Aiden has begun to regain consciousness and whimper from the pain in his head and throughout his body, which is not surprising after such a brutal fight and blows to the ground. But he couldn't help but hear a strange sound, and when he woke up, he felt someone holding his hand. It was a stranger who wanted to add him as a friend before he woke up. Understandably, like any normal person, Aiden was shocked at the sight of an unfamiliar girl, especially a player, and screamed in fear, asking who she was. The girl decided not to shock the poor guy any further and simply told him her name. And it turns out that this player with periwinkle hair has a short and clear name, Arya. Aiden immediately realized that he was not dealing with a simple, unplayable character, but a real player, and not a low-level one at that. But what did she want from him now? In order to calm down and know what kind of enemy you are facing, you need to scan your opponent and find out how strong your enemy is today. Arya tries to calm Aiden down and asks him not to be so afraid, as she has come with peaceful intentions and insists that she poses no threat. The status of the female player is unknown, and karma is something completely incomprehensible, but the stranger continues to insist that she is definitely not bad, so everything is fine. It can't be that a user's karma is minus 100, and he understands perfectly well that this girl smiling like an angel could turn out to be a real devil with a halo. The frightened blacksmith began to scream hysterically and asked the girl to leave him alone, But Arya did not understand Aiden's inadequate reaction. Seriously alarmed, the blacksmith coldly asks what Arya wants from him, remaining cautious while questioning this strange girl in the middle of nowhere. Arya is somewhat disappointed by Aiden's reaction and says that she did not expect him to be such an uncompromising and gloomy old man who is difficult to interact with. Moreover, she had healed Aiden despite not having many healing potions in her supply, and she had used several on him. Aiden coldly and logically replied that it was nothing more than a gesture of goodwill on Arya's part, which he did not encourage in any way. The cunning red-haired bastard finally reveals her motives, and Arya admits that the blacksmith has caught her interest and that she has never met anyone like him before, which is why Aiden has earned her favor. To be honest, Aiden cannot understand that she is really talking nonsense, which he cannot understand no matter how hard he tries. The new quest didn't take long to appearing before Aiden's eyes in a bright golden light and attracting the attention of the blacksmith, who was now curious about what was being prepared. A third quest appeared, emphasizing that he had to level up, and Aiden wondered why this quest appeared at this moment when there was a demon in front of him. The redhead rejoices because, thank God, it seems that he is the only one who can see his quest window, but Arya is intrigued by the reaction of her new acquaintance. Aiden, as his conscience dictated, Aiden thanked the girl and said that since she hadn't asked for anything in return, she could just go on her way. So standing up, Aiden said goodbye to Arya and turned his back on her to go back to his task, but Arya said nothing. The girl was silent for a second, thinking about what to say in response to the young man she had saved, but she already had a plan. It seemed that Aiden had broken away from his new acquaintance, who was very clingy, and that the mountain was behind him, but as you can imagine, that was not all. That bitch Arya started bombarding him with hundreds of friend requests, hinting that this was the only thing she wanted in exchange for helping Aiden. Arya is happy to continue bombarding Aiden, who is already treating her harshly and coldly, attracting the attention of this blue-eyed maniac who won't leave him alone. Aiden asked her why she decided she had the right to pursue him when he already told her he didn't want anything to do with her anymore, and their paths had already diverged. Kowalski yells that Arya is just getting on his nerves and asks why the hell she is following him when he clearly told her to get off his back and move on. The girl listened to his questions and, in response to Aiden's rude and aggressive tone, asked why she couldn't follow him and share his travels with him. The redhead asks what this strange girl wants from him and why she is following him, and Arya replies that Aiden doesn't look strong and will surely fall down again. Aiden asked the girl to just leave him alone and not bother him, but she slyly narrowed her eyes and said that she was right about what she thought. The girl points to something behind him and asks Aiden to turn around and see for himself what is right behind him, ready to attack. When the red-haired man turned around, he saw a huge wolf with its jaws open, ready to bite the throat of the careless, red-haired idiot. Luckily, he managed to react before the predator tore his throat out, reaching for a weapon to fight back. Aiden managed to fight off one of the wolves, which squealed and coughed up blood, howling, and flew away like a bag of shit. So this time Aiden was lucky. The wolf fell to the ground and convulsed in its death throes, while Aiden surveyed the situation around him, and it looked like there would definitely be a lot of trouble. There were an extraordinary number of wolves around Aiden, and they surrounded the blacksmith in a friendly pack, who helplessly held his sword against the beasts that were about to avenge their leader. Irritated, Aiden defended himself with his sword and wondered where so many of these magical creatures had come from, as the area around him had been completely clear just moments before. Arya said that the situation was definitely not simple, as the weak Aiden would not be able to stand against such a large number of wolves, a whole pack against a weakling like the redhead. Smiling like an innocent angel, the girl asked Aiden if he wanted her help, but the red-haired man replied that he would manage without her help. Therefore, he must take his fate into his own hands and not whine, but tear apart everything and everyone standing in his way and not think about anything else when fighting for his own development. Swinging his sword above his head, the blacksmith ran towards the wolves that were already aiming their jaws at his throat, and would show them who was the real master of this situation and of life. The man on the throne received a report from a spy camera that had already reached him and thought deeply about what his assistant, the all-seeing eye camera had told him. The man asked again if he was sure that the Easter egg was missing and that it was not the work of a player, but of some insignificant blacksmith named Aiden who had appeared out of nowhere. The white-haired man wondered if it was really possible to steal the Easter egg and thought that it could only be done by destroying the guardian of the dungeon. The thing is, this guard was armed with so-called immortal armor, and in theory, defeating him is an impossible task for an ordinary player of any level of strength. It all looks very strange, and the mountain of destroyed armor looks shocking. If nothing is done, the moderator will soon find out what happened, and that will be the end. Therefore, and Lloyd, known as the system operator, gets up from his seat, and although he is very tired, he is going to do everything he knows and can to figure it out on his own. But the system operator is more than certain that this is the work of none other than the defective character they wanted to take out and erase. Aiden has caused a lot of trouble and problems that will now prevent him from moving on peacefully without consequences for himself, since the authorities are already on his tail. But what can you say? The wolves had been killed and their lifeless bodies lay in piles at Aiden's feet, a reminder of his recklessness and stubbornness. It would not be an exaggeration to say that his hands were shaking with incredible force due to the heavy load on them, which had never before been used with weapons. But this fact cannot be denied, and Aiden himself certainly coped with the task he had set himself and killed all the wolves that stood in his way. Just think that this unskilled character was able to so easily defeat so many magical creatures, and it seems like an impossible dream in his eyes knowing his past. What can we say? The editor's ability is truly remarkable, and no one could have imagined that everything would turn out exactly as Aiden had planned, and his stats have increased. His status is still stable and he can double his stats, but the consequences will not be long in coming, and next time he will have to be careful. His ability helped him greatly, but he would like to know what other abilities he can unlock. And another very important question is bothering him at the moment. Why hasn't his level increased at all? And why is he stuck in one place with 0 experience points, no matter how hard he tries and no matter how hard he works? It's as clear as day that in order to become stronger in this world and simply survive, he must work on increasing his level and his strength. There are only 2 ways to do this. The first is to complete quests directly from players and unplayable characters, and the second is dangerous. This is, of course, hunting magical creatures, which is how the so-called players on the servers have always survived, and now Aiden can feel what it's like to be in their shoes. But Aiden himself understands that something is definitely wrong here, even if you think about using hunting magical creatures to increase your level, and that everything is definitely not that simple. Therefore, the redhead thinks about trying some other way to achieve his goal and expresses this aloud. And Arya is already thinking about what Aiden just said. The girl says nothing and continues to watch as Aiden discovers the wonderful life of a player with full gaming rights on the map. And that's good. Therefore, following his guesses and theories, Aiden spent the next few days fighting magical creatures to improve his skills. He had no choice, as the other unplayable characters did not give him any tasks, so he had to fend for himself as usual and act alone. But the problem was that no matter how many monsters he destroyed and how many commands he entered, his level refused to increase even slightly. But then, after so many moments of futile battle, he came to understand something that Aiden didn't want to or couldn't understand, and that was the so-called established limit, the same limit that separated unplayable characters from players, and unplayable characters cannot cross this limit no matter how hard they try to climb out of the sky. But the players chosen by the system are a completely different matter, and for them, there is definitely no limit, and the growth of the heroes is definitely not limited, and they will do whatever they want. And if a person is not one of them, then they must understand their place in the hierarchy of the world and accept that they will never be able to reach their level no matter how hard they try. Therefore, your fate is simply to remain on the so-called precipice of development and accept your role as a simple, unremarkable character in the background of any scene. The young blacksmith's head ached from the many questions tearing him apart, and he wondered how to proceed and what to do now that his potential was limited by his status as a non-privileged person. But until the very end, Aiden was sure that there was a way out, and it would come from everywhere except the coffin. When a new acquaintance who had been with him the whole time called out to him, Arya asked Aiden if he would finally do what he had to do and press the Add Friend button, stop fooling around, and accept her help. Aiden shouted at the girl, asking her how long she was going to follow him and when she would finally disappear from his sight and leave the blacksmith alone, but no. Besides, she still had something to ask him, and this question had been bothering her since the moment the blue-eyed girl first saw this strange NGP. The girl asked why Aiden was so desperate to become stronger, and now he finally had an answer for this human-like creature with blue hair. Arya said that no matter what, if Aiden wants to level up, she has something to offer him, and this idea comes to her like no one else in the location. The girl explained that the easiest way to level up would be to play in team mode, where they could hope for so-called cooperation and benefits for his growth. To the surprise of the redhead and his eyes widened with fear, the girl replied that he would definitely not succeed on his own, as Aiden himself had said in his thoughts. But it might work, because as a player, Arya would definitely gain experience levels that would be shared between the two of them as members of the same team. That way, he would have a chance to become stronger, and to Arya's surprise, Aiden finally agreed to cooperate with her, even though he had previously shouted at her to leave him alone. Arya asks if she heard him correctly, and wonders if she is dreaming due to exhaustion that this stubborn man has finally agreed to her proposal, quickly changing his plans and mood. Aiden repeats that he agrees to the same team style of play that Arya had previously imposed on him so strongly, and she is definitely not imagining this wonderful phenomenon. Arya is seriously happy and throws herself into Aiden's arms, hugging him because she can't believe that Aiden agreed so easily after resisting for so long. But she doesn't lag behind him and hints that while they are getting to the right place, he should add her as a friend, but Aiden still asks her to leave him alone. Finally, they reached a new location known as the so-called Hekla Canyon, where a new challenge awaited the anomalous NGP. But the entrance to this canyon is for players with a level of 30 or higher, and Arya explained that players call this simply taking and raising the level of a friend by their own efforts. As a knowledgeable girl, she advised the blacksmith to just stand still, because if he takes a step to the side, he could die on the spot, and it would be game over. Once again, the girl says that today is definitely a lucky day for Aiden, as such things usually cost a lot of money, and the guy realizes that for her, it's just a hunt. First, he needs to do everything in his power and, with the help of the update and edit commands, apply experience points and double his strength. You can only quickly raise your level by earning points this way, but that won't last long, so you need to have a backup plan in mind just in case. But until the very end, Aiden begs all the heavenly powers to let him at least survive the battle against the monsters and try to defeat the monster himself. For the girl, it worked just as Arya had told him at the beginning, and with the help of teamwork, he easily gained experience without even trying, just standing there. It worked perfectly, and finally his level began to rise after such a long break, at least some changes for him, and the development of Aiden's potential for future quests. The blacksmith is pleased with the result and emphasizes that this is what should have been done from the very beginning, without even knowing that a spy camera was watching him at that very moment. Trouble is not long in coming, as the device has already begun to read Aiden's actions and has discovered the same bug in the system that caused what he saw. So the mistake and the threat have been found, and as mentioned earlier, Aiden is the bug that was supposed to be the so-called start of the virus that will destroy their entire world. The redhead's thoughts about Arya are also justified, as he thought she would be a strong player, but he could not have expected such a level from her, so he is in shock. The guy, everything is too strange, and Aiden is still wondering why she is so attached to him and won't leave him alone, no matter how many times he asks her to back off. It seems that Arya can see something that Aiden himself cannot, and she focuses her attention on the same strange object in the air near her new friend, the same damn spy device that is following her inattentive friend, who has no idea what is going on and that he is being watched, appears near Aiden. Aiden is too busy with the fact that he has finally completed his quest, and on top of that, his level has been raised, his ability points have increased, and his abilities have also grown. Aiden is wondering where he can spend his reward and hopes that he will get some new ability for his own development and have at least something. But now Aiden is only interested in one thing, and that is where the blue-haired girl who followed him around like a puppy all the time has disappeared to. But Arya hadn't run away, and the fragments of the spy camera showed that she had done what she had to do to save her new friend from the moderator's watch. The spy camera was broken and sparking with flashes of electricity, shouting only warnings that it had found the same bug that had caused the coup. Arya watched with a cold smile as the camera beeped to report the object to the system upon destruction and screeched warnings so that everyone would know about it. It continued to beep until Arya stepped on it with her foot, crushing it into a pile of small pieces and silencing the bastard right there and then without fuss. She herself does not know what this device is, but she can say for sure that it is getting in her way, and for that it paid dearly and was trampled by her right here and now without a chance. And now that she has found the one she has been looking for so long, she has no desire to let anyone else have such a wonderful gift as the boy Arya wants as her treasure. Aiden is her prize, and no one else should have him. She sees Aiden as her treasure and valuable prize that she must keep close to her at all times. Finally, Aiden did what Arya wanted so much and added her as a friend, which greatly pleased the girl, who no longer expected anything from this capricious redhead. Arya continued to thank him and sing about how he was finally stubborn enough to understand that she was not a bad person, just a sweet girl, but the man simply asked her to shut up. As it turned out, the former NG Aiden was already at level 30 thanks to Arya's powers, but he briefly said that in reality he hadn't done anything except add her as a friend. He started traveling with a player he met by chance whose name was Arya, and he still doesn't understand what she found so incredible in him. But he cannot deny the fact that the girl helped him a lot, so he added her as a friend and thinks that nothing worse can happen from that. Aiden, by editing and updating all the data, he gained a truly useful skill and was able to change his class, becoming something completely new in the world. Now he is no longer an NG, and even less a player, but something on a completely new level, unknown until now, called an anomaly, and for the system, a new player. Now he can raise his level himself by completing tasks and will not depend on anyone in the future he so desires, and can do everything for his revenge. Aiden understands that a very long road lies ahead of him, but he has become much stronger than his previous NG version, who could not even stand next to him. But there is only one thing left for him to beg God and all the heavenly powers that can take pity on him and send him such mercy to calm him down. All Aiden's thoughts were interrupted by what happened beside him, and his gaze was burned by a golden light that seriously surprised him because something had happened that turned the world upside down. The redhead stopped thinking about what was troubling him and turned back to face what had happened in that mysterious place behind him. Arya noticed that Aiden had gone somewhere, turning around, and immediately became alarmed and asked where this restless new friend was going. Seeing that the red-haired boy was walking very quickly in the opposite direction, she asked again where her friend was going before he could tell her about his plans. Finally, Aiden stopped, and she was able to catch up with him and ask him what the hell he was thinking and what this crazy guy was doing now. When Arya finally caught up with her friend, they saw something in front of them that looked like a wall of distorted space, with a dark matrix in the middle. The young blacksmith had never seen anything like it and asked Arya what this distortion of space was, what it could mean, and what the nature of this digital phenomenon in the middle of the field was. Arya replied that they simply called such an area a bad sector, which was cursed for normal players, and Aiden asked her to explain what exactly a bad sector was. It is a space abandoned by the system and a zone that has been cleared by moderators, and it has remained there on its own and turned into this very cursed bad space. The main problem is that no one knows what might come out of this place, and the creatures that exist beyond its boundaries could be dangerous. As they say, I won't believe it until I see it with my own eyes and can believe what they say. So Aiden took a step forward to enter this forbidden zone. Arya asked if this idiot was serious, but she didn't stop him, not judging her friend's choice. She asked him to wait for her and ran after her friend, keeping up with him. Aiden wonders if the bad sector is a hint at what happened to his homeland after it was reformatted by the moderator, and now his homeland is a so-called lottery. Arya asks if they are definitely going there and can't wait for Aiden to answer what he is going to do, and whether he will take her with him to investigate. Aiden says nothing and, placing his hand on the shield, begins to destroy it, while Arya whines, getting on his nerves with her impatience as she opens the gate. When Aiden destroys the gate with his moderator powers, Arya freezes with a look of surprise on her face in response to the power possessed by this NG. The guy emphasized that she could go in without him, but the problem was that only the moderator or system operator could enter this cursed space. Aiden aggressively insists once again that Arya finally get off him, climb down from his shoulders, and just walk away like a normal person and stop acting like an idiot. Everything was just as Arya had thought, and it turned out that Aiden was really special. And it was no wonder she had set her sights on him and wouldn't let him out of her sight for a moment so as not to share him. Therefore, Arya decides to follow Aiden wherever this young talent goes, and will follow him to the end, playing the role of a so-called friend jester. Aiden did enter this cursed space, but he doesn't fully understand why he did it, what good it will do, and why he needed to enter the wasteland. It turns out that he had no intention or benefit in doing so, and it was definitely not what he wanted. But since he was here, he had to take advantage of the situation. So the young blacksmith calmly moves forward, watching what unfolds before his eyes, and Arya follows him, looking around the area. Aiden was the first to notice that something was definitely wrong here, and his eye was drawn to some unnatural activity not far from them. So the red-haired blacksmith immediately tensed up. The young man's hand reaches for the hilt of his sword, and the blacksmith grips it tightly, preparing to attack first if whatever is hiding there decides to attack, because there is definitely something there. Drawing his sword, Aiden approached the hunched little figure, which he thought must be a wild beast, or if not, then the shadow would turn out to be a monster. And victory over a magical creature, as we know, gives the player experience to level up, so he would not back down from what he had set out to do. But the one whom Aiden took for a wild beast, or a magical creature, turned out to be just a human child, a little boy, hiding in the middle of everything. When Aiden saw the frightened eyes of the human child, the young blacksmith was seriously surprised that there was a small child in the middle of all this damn assault. He couldn't afford to be distracted from the situation around him, and a shell flew towards Aiden's face, which could easily have knocked out his eye or simply sent him to the other world. Luckily, the young man was able to raise his sword in time and repel the enemy's attack, but he was very alarmed by the fact that someone could attack him here. When the redhead looked up, he saw a tall adult man holding a crossbow, hinting that the enemy would not be spared. The man with gray hair and a tired expression on his face said that Henry, the little boy, should come to him to be safe from everything. The little boy hid behind his uncle's leg and looked at everyone with frightened eyes, not understanding what was happening and why his uncle was so scared for him. The adult man kept the guests at a distance and asked if they were players, adding that they hadn't seen other people here for a long time and asking how they managed to get here. The adult's eyes study Aiden, who explains how he got here, why he decided to go further, and why he decided to swing his sword at the child. Studying Aiden's expression, which seems rather suspicious and cold, the man realizes that although Aiden does not look like a friend, he is definitely not dangerous. But his companion with cheerful blue hair looks like she could be a dangerous lady, unlike the stern-looking red-haired young man. No matter how much Arya tries to keep a sweet, friendly smile on her face and present herself as a peaceful creature, her aura betrays the danger she poses. This girl's biofield has such a bright aura that when you look at her, it seems that you are not looking at a girl, but at the very demon itself, surrounded by blue flames. Even an adult man was frightened by such a bright blue, fiery aura, not because he was afraid, but because it was the first time he had seen such a terrifying explosion of energy, and Arya had frightened him. Seeing that his uncle was upset, Henry asked him what had happened, because he did not expect an adult who was supposed to protect him to be so afraid of Arya. The power of Arya's aura made him break out in a cold sweat, and besides, he had never seen such strong players before, and most importantly, he didn't know what to expect from her in the future. He couldn't know for sure what this young woman was thinking or what would happen if she perceived them as her enemies, especially since they were players and they were just ordinary people. The man named Jake was interrupted by the voice of a young man who was calling him, clearly not for no reason, as something had definitely happened when their leader had left them. The young man with blue hair rushed to Jake and shouted that they had a big problem and that without him, they would definitely not be able to figure it all out as usual. Jake decided not to drag it out and asked the young man what had happened and what the problem was, and the young man began to nervously try to explain what was happening in their village. But he found the strength to say that the symptoms of the so-called Helen's disease had worsened dramatically, much to the horror and regret of Mr. Jake from the very beginning. Jake decided to stop playing games with strangers and immediately head to the scene to see what had happened to this little girl. Frightened, Jake ran home like a young deer and opened the door without trying to control himself and burst into the house, where he found a little girl lying there, sick with an unknown illness. He was immediately met by a young girl who addressed Mr. Jake and was sitting on the floor wearing a protective mask on her face, a nurse who had been assigned to watch over Helen. Jake began to rage, asking what the hell had happened, since there had been no sign of trouble before, but the young nurse replied that she unfortunately did not know what to do. Aiden and Arya watched from the doorway, smiling at their friend as he studied the situation, when Mr. Jake's voice broke the silence. Aiden suddenly realized what was going on and what was causing the little girl's complex condition, as it definitely couldn't be a so-called illness. As it turned out, this was not a simple illness, and definitely had a nature that ordinary people, such as the nurse and Mr. Jake himself, could not explain, but he could see it clearly now. He realized that it was not just an illness, but that Helen's condition was caused by something external eating away at the little girl. And Aiden, as the so-called moderator, knew that it was not that simple. He was right, and as a moderator, he received a so-called moderator badge, informing him that a bug had been detected here, along with the same error message and threat. So little Helen, like Aiden himself with his little sister, were once so-called errors and bugs that he, as a moderator, simply had to get rid of. Helen's threat level is still low, but the fact that she has been identified as an error means that Aiden has a new quest to fix the error. Jake is desperate to do something to save Helen, and asks the nurse if there is really no way to help the poor little girl who is dying. The young nurse, her eyes filling with tears, replies that unfortunately there is nothing more she can do, as she knows nothing about the nature of little Helen's illness. Little Henry bursts in, immediately rushing to his little sister, crying and shouting her name, realizing that she is dying. Jake immediately grabs Henry by the arm and yells at, asking who let him in and what he was thinking, but Henry screams to be let go to his sister. Henry ran to his sister and shouted for Helen to open her eyes immediately and look at him, but Jake yelled at him not to touch the sick little girl under any circumstances. Arya spoke up and said that the little girl must be in a lot of pain, and that she had given the people of the village hope that Helen could be saved. But she said that it was too late to do anything, and Jake asked what this stranger was talking about and what she meant by too late. The people did not lose hope, and asked Arya to at least try to help, since she was a player and surely knew what to do, unlike them, who knew nothing. Arya replied that it was definitely not a disease as they all thought, but nothing more than the same bug that had previously killed her friend Aiden and was now consuming Helen. It sounded like a death sentence for Jake and everyone else, as no one wanted to hear that they were faced with something they couldn't do anything to save. Jake couldn't believe his ears, because this was a cursed bug that simply couldn't exist after everything they had already been through on their way to this point. Jake angrily and painfully shouted that their homeland had been turned into God knows what. But among them, as if to make matters worse, there was no one who could resist the bug. Arya explained that bugs don't only occur when someone resists the system, but that their nature can be completely different, and that bugs have different natures and origins. The girl emphasized that they could no longer help, and the worse Helen felt, the more damage she would cause to everything around her and to the world. Arya emphasized that if they didn't want to be deleted just like that, they had to stay as far away from here as possible in order to avoid further unnecessary casualties. When Jake heard this verdict, he could not say anything except to curse the one responsible for everything and swear with one clear word because he would be powerless. Meanwhile, Aiden, who was standing aside, punched the wall with his fist as he was faced with a very difficult choice as a server moderator, as his conscience was tormenting him. Aiden was faced with an emergency quest that demanded he simply take and delete the so-called mistake that Helen had made in the system. The red-haired moderator was torn by the fact that he was now being asked to do something for which he would punish himself for the rest of his life, that is, to simply take and delete the unfortunate child. Suddenly, the cursed sign lit up red in front of him and almost blinded him, revealing a quest that had been slightly updated. Now he is being asked to take and delete the so-called mistake using the powers granted to him as a moderator, and Aiden is torn apart by such cynicism. Of course, he had no intention of doing so, and pressed the button, refusing to do what this cursed system was telling him to do, considering him a moderator freak. But then something unexpected happened. The system warned him that he would be penalized for failing to complete the quest, and asked him if he was sure he wanted to refuse. This made the blacksmith's knuckles turn white and he clenched his fist, unable to contain his anger at the cynicism he now had to face because of everything. Aiden asked if he had been called here just to fix a so-called mistake and destroy a little child that a crazy system had decided was a threat. But Aiden is not like the damned moderator who wiped his sister off the face of the earth and almost took him with her. This whole damned system must be destroyed now, and that's why he will never follow the so-called conditions and instructions of the system, ignoring what awaits him for failing to complete the quests because he doesn't give a damn. Whether it's the system or a so-called bug, he has a head on his shoulders and will do everything he can to change this cursed world for the better, since he managed to survive on his own. As Aiden promised himself and others, he will destroy everything and everyone, that is, everyone who is in any way connected with this inadequate system of bugs and so-called errors. When everyone else was ready to give up and accept that little Helen had to be allowed to die and be removed from this problem, Aiden abruptly opened the door. The redhead told everyone to get out of there and leave him alone so he could examine the little girl and understand what was going on. Aiden insisted that he had to examine this unfortunate little girl, shocking all the locals who had gathered around. And after Arya's words, there was hope. The people asked if there was definitely a way to cure Helen, and the red-haired guest replied that he wasn't sure, but that they definitely had to try and not give up. Henry, with tears in his eyes, the child begged him to save his little sister from her illness, and cried from the pain Henry felt from the fear of losing the only person he knew. The boy begged for help, but the red-haired stranger kept a calm expression on his face, controlling the situation and not giving in to panic. Aiden reaches out to the little girl who is covered in cold sweat as her body is consumed by the so-called curse of the bug, while the blacksmith remains cautious. When the red-haired man lowered his hand to Helen's head, the space around her began to fragment, and the girl opened one eye, which had already turned black from the dark energy. It was time to use the moderator's secret ability, known as merging, to combine the fragments into a single whole for reading. At that moment, Helen's body burst into bright red flames from Aiden's careful action, and countless red fragments scattered around her. Frightened witnesses to this spectacle cannot believe what is happening before their eyes, something so serious and terrifying for humans, and they ask what is going on. While everyone panicked and asked each other what was happening, Arya remained silent, watching and understanding exactly what was happening around her. It was really hard for Aiden, and his face contorted with tension, as he was now doing something that was beyond the limits of a normal human being and went beyond the boundaries of reality. Eventually, Aiden found himself in a so-called space similar to a neural network woven from a multitude of people connected by neural connections. The young rebel moderator realized that he was now in the so-called system space and that there was no end in sight, but now there was no turning back. Aiden understands that since he has already taken such a serious step, he must find a way and an opportunity to fix everything and save little Helen from destruction. Since a bug is the result of a fatal error that occurred as a result of resistance to the rules of a clearly defined system that does not tolerate deviations from the norm. And as a moderator, he is the only one who can fix it. And raising a sword above his head, he prepares to solve this bug with his own hands, without simply destroying the one who is it. The only way to separate Helen's body from the general system is for Aiden to cut all the neural connections that bind little Helen to the entire server system. The young blacksmith realizes that he will surely be able to completely separate this little girl from the system, delete her data, and restore the digital prototype of this child himself. And then, as a result of the so-called update and reboot of Helen's entire prototype, he will be able to restore her just as he was once restored himself. And then, he will definitely be able to save the child. The red light that Aiden himself was glowing with enveloped the little girl, who is now no longer part of the global game server, and now it remains to do the same with the others. It was time to find other people connected to Helen and do the same to them in order to successfully reboot the so-called system in this evil space where the NGPs live. They are all partially infected and connected to each other by a so-called bug trail, which creates the so-called dark energy of the evil cursed space around their small village. And the red-haired rebel moderator rushes forward to disconnect all the characters from the so-called core and reboot the digital data of all the inhabitants of this digital space. A bright white and red light spreads around Aiden, enveloping him on all sides and blinding everyone around him with intense light noise. Arya cannot believe her eyes, because as an experienced player, she did not know how any of this could be possible. But if Aiden is doing it, then it must be real. Jake and his young assistant are afraid and do not understand what is happening around them, as they have never seen anything like this before. And all this burst of energy frightens everyone. From such a bright explosion of energy, the entire area was engulfed in a white-red glow like the morning sun, and all the barriers around began to crumble before the eyes of all the shocked people. Most importantly, the barrier of the so-called cursed space began to disintegrate and was eventually destroyed by Aiden himself, who was able to break down the so-called borders of the cursed evil space. Around the exhausted Aiden, who now stands in the middle of the area that has begun to disintegrate into fragments like broken glass, cries out that he has finally managed to do what he set out to do, but the exact status of his mission is unknown, and Aiden asks himself if he succeeded, and most importantly, how everything went around him, and the fate of his ward, Helen, is unknown to anyone. It is impossible to say at this point whether his plan and actions were successful, but the young man wonders if his innovative approach to fixing bugs was successful and if he caused any problems. But the golden sign before his eyes was about to tell the redhead that the quest was actually complete and that he had completed his so-called quest, which had seemed so difficult and insane. Aiden was appointed and registered as the new moderator of Mount Urch for completing the hidden quest, and Aiden received a command to restore and delete, which he clearly misunderstood. He needed to get rid of the so-called bug, not the child, and the system, that is, the chief moderator, was simply checking him and what choice he had to make for development. At that moment, like rain during the summer heat, a magical healing elixir poured down on Aiden, which was quite an unexpected gesture for him right now, and the man was shaken. Arya has no intention of leaving him alone and pours the elixir on Aiden, but he yells that he is fine and to stop pouring elixirs on him because he is tired of it. The girl grabs the irritated red-haired man by the face and yells at him, asking if he is really okay, and if he is hiding his injuries from them as he could die from exhaustion. Arya emphasizes that she is scared for him and asks him to be careful because he is important to her, but she still wonders where he gets his strength from. Aiden just wants to be left alone. This unpleasant scene for the young blacksmith is interrupted by the voices of people from the village who come to him after Aiden manages to save little Helen and clear their area. Jake, with the children hiding behind him and a young man and a nurse standing on either side, sincerely thanked the stranger for what he had done for them all with his own strength of will. Thanks to Aiden and him alone, not only the little children, but all of them remained alive and unharmed to live in this area, which would now become a new home for all of them for the rest of their lives. They did not know how to thank Aiden for his kindness, but the young red-haired savior was only interested in the sign that appeared in front of him, announcing that the update was complete. Now all the NGPs are free people, and the captain of the self-defense group, Jake and Logan, the guard and the nurse, Sophia and Henry and Helen, the children from the village, are now free people. Now it is called the village of Urk, where 5 people live and there are 0 resources. And the moderator is Aiden, who does not understand what this update is and who these free people are. The young savior understands that this is happening because of his past actions on the server of this village, which was previously a so-called cursed space behind a fence. The thing is, all these people around the children were actively resisting, so he separated them all from the general system in order to perform a normal update on the server. But there was one thing that seriously threatened Aiden's plan and interfered with his actions, almost turning everything upside down, so the boy had to act further for the sake of progress. At that, he couldn't ignore it, so he had to intervene immediately and try to fix the situation so that his plan wouldn't fall apart at the climax. Seeing this, Aiden felt a so-called noise with his own body and immediately sensed where the problem he was facing was coming from, and Aiden had to deal with it now. This source was the root of the problem, similar to a mushroom that gradually grows and spreads mold around itself, spreading the so-called bug. Therefore, Aiden, like no one else, must chop up this bug mycelium while it is still in its infancy. And now, as a moderator, he must take care of destroying the nature of this system, failure and disorder. Aiden knew exactly where the source of the bug was, and he had to do everything in his power to ensure that it would never return. It had to be eliminated here and now, once and for all. In the end, Aiden managed to break through this so-called block, and now he was faced with digital projections of all the people around him, which would now be reformatted. Now, all these people connected to Aiden were reinforced by his energy and were unable to resist him. He could continue and fix all these bugs. It turned out that all these people whom Aiden had disconnected from the main system automatically began to form so-called neural connections in order to finally connect with Aiden himself. For reasons unknown to him, the red-haired moderator began to connect with all these people, as if the society he had created now depended on him. But the only thing Aiden is sure of right now is that they are now free people, no longer connected to the existing system, and have now become free. The redhead asked why they were so sure that he was the operator, and Jake explained that Aiden had saved them all by manipulating the settings of the so-called system for his own benefit. Operators are the best players chosen by the moderators, and if Aiden is not an operator, then there is no logical explanation for what happened, and it definitely looks like the same miracle. The young man asked them not to rush, and asked everyone to get up from their knees, as they were almost strangers, and he was not a cameraman. But the people explained that it was only their own will and nothing else. Moreover, Fate had now decided that he was the rightful master of this land, so this offer was entirely logical and appropriate in the current situation. But what to do now? And should he reveal to the rescued people that he is actually a so-called moderator and not a simple cameraman, as the people thought he was? Be that as it may, Aiden was the one who changed their fate, and it was he who did it, so it didn't matter what decision he made. In any case, they would agree with his verdict. So the red-haired man is shocked that this blue-haired girl, Arya, speaks as if she knows everything in the world and lectures him like a little boy, and this is beginning to scare him very much. The thing is, he can understand Arya, but he has no idea what's going on in the head of this mysterious girl who is definitely hiding something from him. But she is absolutely right, and so Aiden has to accept what she says and understand that he must do everything as he wants and as he thinks is right in his situation as a moderator. So it was all about food, and Aiden decided to start by feeding all the villagers and set a lavish table for everyone to treat the local. The children in Logan's eyes popped out of their sockets at such abundance, and it was clear that they had not eaten for a very long time, so the decision to feed all the locals was absolutely the right one. Jake, on behalf of everyone, thanked Aiden for showing such kindness and deciding to share his supplies with them, thereby feeding them and saving them from starvation. The man had actually begun to worry about the lives and health of these children, as they did not have enough food to survive and starvation was just around the corner, so panic set in. But now Aiden listened to Jake and decided to ask how long this had been going on and when the decline began. The man explained that the village had once been a beautiful place to live happily. It wasn't very big, but it was beautiful and popular with players, until the moderator checked it, and the village was subjected to a so-called cleansing of all living things. But they did not die, and were not deleted from the map database, as an unknown traveler decided to help them by taking a different path and not deleting the characters. This incognito saved them all with his mystical power and immediately disappeared without leaving any answer or hint as to his nature and motives for his unexpected altruism. Therefore, in order to survive, all of them, trapped in the barriers of the cursed space, had to go to great lengths to avoid dying of starvation. They all united and fought together for their lives, and they all became related and became a so-called family, even though they had no blood ties until then. Aiden was pained by the memory that he too had a family, consisting of his little sister Ellis, who had been taken from him by the system, and the cynical policy of moderator purges. Arya, cunning as a fox, watched the negotiations between Aiden and the locals unfold and studied the situation from the sidelines. Suddenly, the girl knew everything and understood that this chest was not just a simple storage container, but definitely contained resources that could be useful to them in the future. So the girl decided to speak up and asked what this interesting chest was doing there and why it was there and why they weren't using it for their own good instead of just letting it stand there. The thing was that this chest looked too beautiful to just gather dust in such a remote place. And finally, Aiden paid attention to her words, and Logan began to explain. Aiden was shocked that it was connected to the so-called system, and Logan explained that this was indeed the case. and that he himself had previously been the so-called guardian of this very vault, so he knew everything. But after this place was abandoned and everyone who could leave did so, it became impossible to open the chest, so it stands here, gathering dust in the corner of this house. Therefore, he had heard that players could knock various rare items out of chests, and it was possible that this would work for him, so he had to try to unlock the chest. Using a moderator command known as a system update and unlock, he removed the so-called protection system from the system chest and hoped that it would work. If he managed to open this chest using the system moderator's privileges, Aiden would be able to access a lot of things that had previously been hidden from him and everyone else. Now he will have as much as he wants and will not know any restrictions on his path. And now we can say that his resources will be absolutely unlimited forever. However, Arya always remains silent and smiles mysteriously, as if she has a grand plan behind her back that she wants to bring to life through this fool Aiden, and no one should interfere. His eyes darted around at the number of weapons and resources that had been stored in the vault belonging to this village, and no one could give him any advice until Aiden appeared. As for work, Aiden is first and foremost a blacksmith, born with a hammer in his hand, destined to repair and improve weapons and artifacts. So he decided to improve everything in the general system. The sharpening was successful, and all the weapons Aiden sharpened were improved, and their skill points increased. But the locals do not believe that everything is legal. Jake asks if they will be punished for receiving such wonderful weapons, now that they have elite swords and axes made by masters and various protective jewelry in their hands. On top of that, Aiden has improved all these weapons, and all these artifacts provide protection and enhance their existing characteristics, as well as all the tools for work. All these items are extremely valuable, and it could have been that all this sharpening would have been in vain. But Aiden assured them that they should not worry because they now have enough results. Aiden explained that they should not think about anything and not feel that they owe him anything, and that this should be considered his gift, and that people should not regret anything and live happily and rejoice. After his resurrection, he had the opportunity to ignore the rules of the system, and only he would decide whether the training would be successful or not, and since that was the case, the resources would not be wasted. Now there was enough food for everyone in the village and for himself, enough to feed an entire army, and people could stop worrying about their own well-being and that of their children. There is now so much money that he could not work for a century and not worry about what work is, and poverty will remain only in his nightmares for the rest of his life. Now he is responsible for the village of Urch, with a population of 5 people, and its resources have grown to 150%, and he is subordinate to the moderator Aiden from this moment on. Arya, with her puppy eyes, begged for new equipment, wanting to get something like the other people, but Aiden did not bother to share with her or with anyone else. But Aiden refused and reminded her that she already had a lot of wonderful, strong equipment and that she should use what she already had, greatly disappointing her with these words. Ignoring Arya's whining, Aiden thinks about how he was able to get a lot of useful things from the common store for his own use in future situations. He had more than enough food and other resources such as weapons and gold, and the new equipment he possessed was extremely powerful and valuable to Aiden and others. Now the most interesting part begins. Although all the other players are complaining about their weapons and money disappearing, Aiden couldn't care less, to be honest. The storage is also part of the system, and users continue to lose resources and write complaints, and on top of that, these players probably receive compensation for losses during update failures. The most important gift is nothing other than Aiden's ability to expand space, and this is the most important asset that this young moderator, a former blacksmith from the outskirts, possesses. This is the ability to change and expand space in order to store many things that may come in handy and carry them with you, which is a difficult task physically. This ability is called the cloud system, and it is a space from which you can retrieve any item or weapon when needed, and you can store anything there. Aiden discovered this ability in an interesting way while studying the entire arsenal available to him in the storage room, and when he had studied absolutely everything, he noticed something interesting besides the resources. Aiden was tired of Arya commenting endlessly, calling the contents of the user's inventory simple trinkets, and he was curious about what lay beyond the confines of the warehouses. So he decided to reach inside the storage room to see if there was anything interesting left at the bottom as a nice bonus for him. Everything seemed fine, and Aiden was digging around in the chest until a black energy appeared and began to consume his hand, fragment by fragment, like something unknown. At that very moment, the same dark energy that lay at the bottom of the chest began to engulf Aiden's hand and pull him inside, and the poor boy was extremely frightened by this. The redhead began to panic when he was pulled into the chest, and he began to scream in panic at what was happening, some unknown devilry that he did not expect. The object named Aiden begins to synchronize with the system and panics because he cannot pull his hand out while the synchronization with the system is in progress, which is currently successful. They were not going to let go of his hand until the synchronization with the system was finally complete, and only then could Aiden get his ill-fated hand out of the chest. Red continues to panic and scream for his hand to be released, and continues to tear at his limb in an attempt to free himself from his so-called captivity in this abstract treasure chest. But finally Aiden is released and he falls feet first, hitting his back painfully on the floor, but still this dark force has released him from this trap and he is finally free. The young moderator remains to recover from the blow and rest after such an ordeal, whimpering in pain, and Arya finally turns her attention to her unfortunate traveling companion. After all, the chest turned out to be completely empty, and the result was that he was completely empty and exhausted by Aiden, who already had his own abilities. Gaining abilities that can make you almost a god is simply unrealistic and impossible to imagine, going beyond all possible limits of the adequate imagination of normal people. Now, Aiden can use the shared storage whenever and wherever he wants, and has full access to it, which allows him to manipulate the shared storage of other players. Therefore, he will need this very much in the future, so he must use this power to the fullest, but also wisely, so that nothing fails because of his machinations. But first of all the residents of the new village of Urch are grateful to him and thank him once again for everything he has done for them and their well-being in the future, so that they simply do not disappear. Aiden didn't just free them from the curse of a bad server, and even if that was the only thing he did, they couldn't ask for more, relying only on their own conscience. So now, and besides, it was time for him to move on. He shocked the people who asked if it was because he didn't like the village, but Aiden replied that he still had a lot of work to do. It seems that this answer was enough for Jake, but Aiden thought that he needed to get as far away from there as possible, because another big problem was brewing for all of them in the future. In a few days, as if on cue, a regular inspection would arrive to identify all potential threats to the entire world in the near future. The moderator had personally noticed Aiden as a bug, and if he kept dragging his feet, all the residents could end up in danger because of him, so he had to do the only right thing and leave. And so he must stay as far away from the village of Urk as possible, so as not to endanger innocent people who, incidentally, have absolutely nothing to do with the bug. Aiden asked the people of Urk not to cry, as he did not say he would leave them forever, and besides, he does not even have a home to return to. So now he was forced to leave them, but that didn't mean he wouldn't return, and he would come back to them soon enough, but until then, they had to take care of themselves. With that, they said goodbye and parted ways peacefully, and all the residents said they would wait for him in the future with all the traditions of hospitality because Aiden is always a welcome guest here. Arya asks Aiden why he left Urch so quickly, since they could have stayed there for a few more days and had a nice rest, enjoying the quality time and food. He has to remain calm in order to give Arya a reasonable explanation, so he tells her that there will be a regular inspection in a few days and that he wants to raise his level by then. Aiden asks Arya if this isn't obvious to a player, but she doesn't rush to answer because she knows Aiden's true nature, which he doesn't know anything about. Arya asks what he is talking about as he is not a player, shocking Aiden into a state of stupor as she has caught him off guard and left him speechless. Now Aiden sternly asks how long this fox has known about his true nature, and she finally calms down from her hysterical laughter and asks what exactly he means by his question. The redhead asked how long this bitch had known that he was not just a player, and avoiding a direct answer, Arya began to reminisce and keep the so-called intrigue in the air between them. She remembered the very day when, after checking an empty location, she saw a man running through the city destroyed by the cleanup, and it had greatly affected Arya at that moment. That's when she saw the red-haired young man who had survived and was running through the ruins in complete despair, and at that very moment, her eyes found what they had been searching for so long. Arya replied that she had known everything from the moment she saw Aiden running through the destroyed, cleared village, and the unfortunate man realized that she had known everything from the very beginning. Arya, so she will, looking into Aiden's eyes like a woman possessed, she promises that no one will ever lay a hand on it, and that she will not abandon him under any circumstances and will not give up on his talent at any cost. But this young moderator is not interested in what Arya promises him, but in the so-called message about the so-called danger that could blow everything up. There are only 15 seconds left, but then there are only 14, and Arya cannot understand what is happening to him, while the redhead tries to understand what exactly is supposed to happen now. There are 13 seconds left, and Aiden falls into a state of shock, breaking out in a cold sweat, frightened that this is not a regular check but an emergency because something is about to happen. The main question is to understand the reasons for the so-called check and the purge that follows it as its logical continuation and consequence of the actions of the violators. It is clear that Aiden is the only one who can sense the so-called danger, and Arya asks why he is so nervous, and the guy yells that the so-called server check is about to begin. Arya is shocked that he can see and know such things, and they only have 3 minutes left, and Aiden asks what exactly the players do during the so-called server check by the moderators. At first, the timer reached 0. The sky around Aiden and Arya darkened, and the emergency check began. They were about to be surrounded on all sides by the moderator's spy cameras. Why shout and cause panic when the check has begun and there is no escape? Aiden, of course, begins to panic, drawing on unpleasant experiences from his own past. Aiden begins to crumble into pieces and his body is engulfed in blue light from all sides. With a blacksmith's cry, he is torn from the ground and transported to the quarantine zone. In hysterics, Aiden screams at Arya, asking why he is glowing, what happened, and how he can get out of there to save himself from another threat of being destroyed and erased forever. Frightened, Aiden screams, reaching out to Arya and begging her for help, as he is a newcomer who knows absolutely nothing about what is happening to him and why it happened. But the girl doesn't even bat an eye, and emotionlessly tells Aiden not to worry, and just wait to see what happens next, and not to panic while waiting for this test to end. Aiden screams hysterically, asking what it means to just wait, and he can be understood, as it looks like absolute trash when you are being swallowed alive and asked to shut up and wait. Finally, Aiden's desperate cries died away, and the young man was swallowed up by the digital space and disappeared from Arya's sight, who didn't even blink when Aiden disappeared from her eyes. But then Aiden himself fell to the ground with a feeling of pain throughout his body and cursed loudly when he fell so sharply without any chance to soften his fall and badly bruised his body. In front of him stood a huge group of people, enough to populate an entire metropolis, and now Aiden saw how many different types of people were actually there. Looking at all these people, Aiden asked himself where he was, who these people standing in front of him were, and what it all meant in the context of the events. Aiden understood perfectly well that all the people he saw in front of him were just players, and moreover, strong characters of a fairly high level. So the unfortunate newbie had fallen into a trap. Now Aiden had the answer to his question about where all the players go during checks and updates, and now the redhead understood perfectly well where all the players were being moved. He sees such a large number of players in one place for the first time, not just a large number, but a colossal number, and thinks he should go down and try to get some information. But Arya told him to wait because she has no idea when she will arrive and join him, so the situation smells fishy, to be honest. Besides, nothing bad will happen if he just asks the more experienced players what he wants to know, but Aiden feels very uncomfortable among them all. It's all just unbelievable because Aiden had already thought that he had finally become strong, but he was so cruelly thrown from the sky to the ground, and now he was faced with a whole bunch of titans. Aiden runs a status check to understand the status of those he has encountered, and to know how strong the players in front of him are, feeling that he is just a pathetic worm. All players above level 200 think that it's very sad here, and there's nothing to do, and they need to create content, but there's nothing to do here, so they all admit that everything is shit. The young blacksmith moderator understands perfectly well that he still has a lot of growing to do, and now he sits with his arms folded, wondering when the check will end so he can think about what to do next. But first of all, he has to find Arya, who he has a lot of questions for, and Aiden is thinking about what to ask her and in what order when he hears that the check is almost over. But the main thing is not when it will all end, but what will happen after the server check is over, and Aiden was already interested in what the two young men were discussing. The man with a cigarette in his mouth asked his panicking friend if he was small and knew that he definitely had to go for this check, but his friend had no answer. The man replied that after this check there would be another check by the moderators, and his friend cursed even more in response to this unpleasant explanation. Players complained that they could die of boredom and beg for it all to end quickly, adding that they weren't even warned about it and why all these checks are necessary in the first place. Aiden admits that there are too many so-called weirdos among the players and that it's better for him not to get involved and stand aside, as another knight suddenly nudges him in the shoulder. He didn't want any trouble, but he got himself into it when he was kicked hard in the shoulder by a stranger who now looks like he's going to rip his head off, and Aiden is definitely in trouble. Definitely doomed, and the man Aiden bumped into looks so angry that the blonde-haired man is ready to tear the throat of the unfortunate red-haired newcomer who had such bad luck. The blonde grabs the redhead by the shoulders and yells at him, asking if he's blind and where he's going, and that since he had the nerve to do that, he definitely wants to get his face smashed in, and the whole crowd is yelling that there's a fight. Aiden realizes that he shouldn't draw attention to himself, and if things take a turn for the worse, he'll be the only one who suffers. And thank God he knows the nature of freaks like this. If he simply ignores the man's blows and doesn't react, he'll soon calm down and leave him alone, and he'll be able to get out of there without any trouble or bloodshed. A stranger saved Aiden from getting knocked out by putting his arm out to stop the attacker and reminding him that no one treats newbies like that. The one who saved Aiden from a sure concussion was a young man, most likely an aristocrat in armor, who declared that the attacker was nothing but a sad parody of a human being who only knew how to swing his fists.